So today's session with Jas Rawlinson is all about writing your story in your book and things like that, which is really interesting. So the background is that Jas actually did grow up where I grew up. I actually knew Jas's mum because she was a friend of my mum. So there's a long backstory here. But Jas is now an Australian resilience and suicide prevention speaker, a book writing coach, and that's exactly what she's come along today for, which is to help us all get these ideas we've got and turn them into a book. And most people have a book in them, I think. It's just a matter of that confidence to get out there and put it into a story and actually share that. So without any further ado, Jas, tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing in this whole space, because I'm fascinated by it. You know, as I always say, I'm not a very good speller or writer. So when I see someone who is, I go, oh, what a talent.
Yeah, thanks, Scotty. It's interesting what you said about talent, because I will actually be diving into that today and the talent myth when it comes to writing. But yeah, my story is grew up in Sawtell and the sort of mid-north coast area. Always had a passion for writing since I was a little girl. You know, you'd always see me writing in my notebooks or writing short stories, like most young girls, usually writing about horses or something like that. And yeah, I went to university in Coffs to learn more about creative writing and journalism and things like that. And got started in my career journey more in terms of working as a magazine editor and doing SEO content writing, and probably following the sort of traditional path that a lot of writers see for themselves. Particularly when I was at university, really the only options we were given was, well, you can become a starving artist and write books, or you can become a journalist, and that was about it. And it's interesting, as I have sort of grown through my journey, it's transformed into something completely different. And I think where I am now wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for simply exploring a lot of different options and volunteering. And me personally, I have a real passion for a lot of social issues like suicide prevention, domestic violence, child abuse, issues that people can often find really difficult to talk about. And my passion is really helping people to break those issues down so they're much more digestible, and helping to empower people to tackle these issues and actually be part of social change. And long story short, that has led me into the career I have today, not only as an author, but also as a book coach for other writers and aspiring authors as well. And I specialize particularly in memoir and personal development books, because storytelling is my real passion. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. And you know, is there one, before you get into it, is there, just to give a bit of a theme, is there one thing that you recommend to inspire people to actually take that next step? Is there any one, this is for you, or do you just want to share it as you go through?
I'll share as I go through, but I will say that I will definitely be touching on what you said before about the talent side of things. And what I want people to know is that you don't have to be the world's most talented writer or the next J.K. Rowling or Mark Manson or anyone like that in order to have a book that is either a bestseller or a book that creates global change or change within your communities. And the number one thing I want to share before we get started is all about commitment. And I think the fact that, you know, everybody that's here today, I want to congratulate you and welcome you to this session as well, because a lot of people don't even make it this far. They're like, oh yeah, I'll go to that webinar, I'll write that book one day, but they never take any action. So thanks to everybody who's joining us today, because you've already taken that most important step, and that's commitment.
Excellent. All right, well, let's get started. Do you want to share the screen, or what would you like to do next?
Yeah, so I've actually got a question that I would love to ask, and then I'll share my screen shortly. But I always love to start a session with like a little pop quiz. So what you're saying before, you know, about most people having a book in them. I actually like to throw this one out there to you, Scotty. How many people do you think dream of writing a book, say just in the USA alone? How many, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of people would be your guess of dreaming of writing a book?
Oh, look, I would suggest a lot. I mean, I would suggest a lot of people want to write a book. How many people do you go that go like they'll say things like, I should write a book about this? I mean, I think a lot of people do. And the other thing I do believe too is that everyone has a story. Everyone has a story.
Absolutely.
And there's always an audience for everyone who has a story. And I think everyone has a story. So in other words, but not everyone makes that final leap into that book. I've got a whole heap of them here and on the shelf behind me. So I would suggest a lot, but you've probably got a stat on it somewhere.
If you were to
like
pick
80%?
a figure out of I'll actually tell you, it is 200 million people in the USA, in the USA alone, that is,
wow,
who actually dream of writing a book or a screenplay at some point in their life. But like you said, there's only a very small percentage who do, and that percentage is 10%. So you're very close. But it is quite a sobering statistic. And that is why I'm so passionate as well about doing these presentations and teaching people about book writing and storytelling, because I do believe, like you as well, that everybody has a story that can impact and change the world. And you don't need to be the world's greatest writer to do that. But I would really love to see that figure change from 10% and grow to, at least 50%. So that's really my mission every time I do a talk. So in terms of today, to give you just a brief outline of what I'll be going through, I'll just be taking you through 3 of the top myths that often hold people back from writing or finishing their book, and what the reality of those myths actually are, and how to move through those challenges and those blocks that we often set up, for ourselves, so that we can actually finish and get our stories out into the world. So what I might do is, just having a look at the time, I'm just going to screen share with you now, and we'll go through that. Cool. So let's dive into it. So the number one thing that often holds people back is this myth that I'm not talented enough to write a book. I didn't go to university. I didn't study creative writing. Who would even want to listen to me? What authority do I have to write a book or talk about this subject? And that's a very big one that holds people back. But the reality is that, writing a best-selling book or a book that creates global change isn't about talent. So just as I was saying before, it's actually about lots of things, but one of the top things is commitment, your commitment to actually getting this story out there. Likewise, it's not about being the world's greatest writer or having a university degree. And sometimes, the reality is that the best stories actually come from the most challenged writers. So in my career, I've worked with, dozens of everyday people. Some of them are pretty good writers. Some of them really, really struggle. They can't write at all. But regardless, they've still had an amazing story in them that the world really needs to hear. Now, I've got one particular example today that if you follow my work, you may have heard me share this one before, but I think it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where writing a book really isn't about talent. So this is kind of a quite well-known figure here in Australia. Does anybody know? Put your hand up if you know who this person here is. Scotty does?
I think of a name, but I know that she's smashed it.
Yeah. So this here is Constance Hall, and she's a somewhat divisive figure in Australia, but regardless, quite a well-known figure now. Didn't used to be. In her own words, she's just a redneck bogan mum who really likes to speak her mind on things that are important to her. Now, she's actually got, that's probably higher now since I've done this, but around 1.5 million followers on Facebook alone. She's a best-selling author of 3 books, and it was her first book, I believe, that actually was the highest-selling book in 2016. Sold over 150,000 copies when it was released. And she's gone on to have her own clothing label and become a charity ambassador. And she was on, I think, Dancing with the Stars in Australia, and has had so many amazing opportunities. And like I said, in her own words, she's just a bogan, mother of, a bunch of bratty little kids, Now, if you were to look at her Facebook, you would probably go, what the hell? How did this person become a best-selling author. Look at how many typos are in her Facebook posts. Look at the grammatical errors, like in the way that she really, really is not the world's best writer. And I'm very upfront about this. And it's not to be mean to her or anything like that, but to show you that you don't have to be the world's best writer to write a best-selling book. Now, if you look at any of Constance's posts online, you'll see that there's a lot of grammatical errors, typos, things that don't really flow very well. But the reason she has been so successful is not about being a great writer. It's because she's a fantastic storyteller. And that is why she has been so successful. She's really, really nailed it when it comes to sharing really vulnerable and personal stories and using those stories to actually make her audience feel seen and heard and to solve the problems that they're experiencing in their lives. And that is one of the keys to writing a successful book. A lot of people make this mistake of writing a book that is just for them. They have an idea they want to get out there and they're very focused on telling it the way they want to tell it. And while that's important, you also need to be thinking about your ideal reader and the problem that you're solving for them. And that's why she has been so successful at what she does, because, not because she has a university degree or she has impeccable writing skills, but she's a fantastic storyteller. So that's one of the first points that I really want to make. Second to that is, don't forget that every successful author out there works with an editor. There's a very good reason that editors exist. And that is because a lot of people out there need help with their writing, regardless of whether they're already a pretty great writer or they're kind of starting from scratch. So don't let the talent myth or, not being the world's greatest writer hold you back from starting your book. The second myth that I commonly come across is, writing a book is a waste of time unless you're famous. Why should I bother writing a book unless I have X amount of followers or, this kind of status? The reality is that writing a book is actually the best way to open doors in your career, open doors in a business sense and amplify your message. And it really doesn't matter whether you are hashtag Insta famous, LinkedIn famous, or anything like that. Now, there's lots of different examples that I could share here, but I think one of the probably easiest case studies I can give is myself. And that's because, like most of us here, I'm just an everyday person. Yes, I have had some extraordinary media opportunities in the last few years, but I'm not a celebrity. But yet my book has opened the most incredible opportunities up for me throughout the last couple of years. So just having a book has allowed me to speak at global summits with celebrities like Justin Baldoni, to get incredible endorsements from suicide prevention leaders like Kevin Hines, been on a lot of really amazing podcasts, had front page newspaper spreads, lots of different things, spoken in Parliament House. And all of these opportunities have come from having a book. And in some cases, people have not even read my book. They literally just see that I have a book and they're like, oh, wow, you're an author. That's amazing. Like, come and speak at this event. And it's really amazing how many opportunities can open for you simply from writing about your life or having a book. And so that's something I really want to make clear today, is that, like I said, I'm not a celebrity, but my book has created the most extraordinary opportunities for me. And I think it's really important for people to remember that. Likewise, sharing our stories and knowledge through a book is the best way that we can actually develop that know, like, and trust factor, which anyone in business knows is crucial if you want to have a successful business, if you want to share a message that creates global impact, and if you want to have any kind of influence in the world. Most people have probably seen this quote from Zig Ziglar, but it's a really poignant one, just about, if people like you, they'll listen to you, but if they trust you, they'll do business with you. And that is why book writing in particular is so powerful. There's the quote here about how your goal in every communication is to influence your target audience. And information alone rarely changes any of these. Research has shown that the most well-designed stories are the most effective vehicle for exerting influence. So again, book writing, storytelling, it's your number one way to actually convey an important message to the world. And as I said, that's exactly why memoir writing and storytelling is so powerful. Now, a lot of people might think to themselves, okay, that's great, Jas, but how would I even get a book published without having a huge following? Now, in the past, people have always gravitated towards traditional, publishing. That's kind of been the main way that people have gotten their story out into the world. But it's actually never been easier to get your message out there and to have access to publishers, whether that's self-publishing or assisted publishing. And writers actually have so much more control over how, when, and where their work is published. And you'd actually be surprised that most people now, including very influential people, are turning to self-publishing. Just since 2018, the self-publishing industry has grown by 40% and over 1.6 million books were self-published in the USA alone. So it's not the small sort of backup option that many people used to see it as. It's now actually the preferred way of getting your book out there. As I said, even high-profile people are turning to self-publishing. Hands up if anyone here knows who this Australian is. Yep, most people know Turia Pitt. She actually published one of her most recent books, Good Selfie, through a self-publisher. So if somebody like her, who has traditionally published and has access to pretty much any publisher, is choosing this option, it's a really good example of just how powerful it is. I'm just sort of keeping tabs on time, but I always love to share something a bit funny, and give us a little bit of a laugh throughout our learning journey. And it's important to recognize that when you are self-publishing, obviously you want to do your research. If you don't, you can end up with something a little bit like this. Everything I know about women, I learned from my tractor. We've got this book here from someone called Roger, and I'm guessing that Roger probably doesn't have a wife, or he probably wouldn't have written this book. You've also got How to Make Money in Your Spare Time with a man featuring a balaclava. So probably not the best option for teaching people about making money. And of course, you've got this book, which has become a bit of a cult classic, Still Stripping After 25 Years. Now, I think that Eleanor probably knew what she was doing in terms of getting her quilting expertise out into the world with this book cover. But still, it's a poignant reminder that while self-publishing is, an amazing option, you obviously want to do your research and make sure that you're working with a publisher who's aligned with you and is going to help you bring your book out into the world in the best way possible. Usually when I give a presentation, I go through some very key questions that people should ask if they're taking the self-publishing journey. We've only got, a short amount of time today, so I might just take you through one of the most important ones, I feel, and that is, regardless of who you are going with, it's very important to find out where that publisher is located and what are their contact terms. Are they going to be on the phone with you to talk if there's a problem? Will they be there to help if issues arise? That's one of the main reasons I went with my publisher, who's based here in Australia, because I know that if anything isn't looking right with my manuscript formatting, or if I have any questions, I can pick up the phone anytime. I don't have to submit a ticket and wait for 3 days for someone to get back to me, or wait for 2 weeks for someone to get back to me. So if you are thinking about going down the self-publishing route at some point, that is one of the top questions that I would ask any publisher that you approach. Now, the third myth that I often hear from people is, Jas, writing a book is just too time consuming and it's too expensive. It's just too overwhelming and too much. And whenever people explain it to me, this is pretty much how they describe it. I'm going to have to lock myself away in a cave for a whole year to write this book. I will have no life. I'll grow a big long beard, and maybe this is something that you can relate to as well. The reality is that writing, publishing, and marketing a book has actually never been easier nor more accessible to everyday writers. This is just a handful of some of the everyday people I've worked with in the last couple of years. None of them would describe themselves as writers or authors or experts, yet we've been able to publish and get their stories out into the world very, very easily. And there are so many options to suit writers wherever they're at today. One of my top time-saving tips for you, if you are short on time, is to actually work with a ghostwriter. Does anybody here know what a ghostwriter is? Raise your hand if you know. Yep, most people do. Cool. Sometimes when I say this, people are like, oh, what is that? Is that some like spooky person who is like spying on my work? No. As you know, a ghostwriter is basically there to work alongside you and to do the writing for you. Instead of you writing, they're writing your story for you and working with you. There are many, many benefits to working with a ghostwriter. As you'd know, some of those are that obviously it's a really fantastic way to get your story out into the world faster and without taking time away from life and business, without turning into that person that's locked themselves away in a cave for a whole year. But there are some other really interesting benefits as well. It's a fantastic way to increase your credibility by actually serving the world with a book that really hits home with your message and your voice. And it's a fantastic way to look after your well-being as well. For me, I tend to work with a lot of people who have gone through and overcome a lot of severe adversities. And because of that, sometimes they will ask me to ghostwrite their stories for them because maybe it's still a bit too close to home emotionally. So it's a way of looking after their emotional health while also getting their story out into the world faster. And just to run you through very quickly the cost part of this myth that holds people back, writing a book is actually not as expensive as a lot of people think. So for me, when I wrote my first book, I had just become a new mum, and I only had, X amount of savings to actually get my book out into the world. And I actually ran a crowdfunder to raise part of the funds that I needed for that first print run. And you'd actually be surprised how many people run crowdfunding campaigns these days. And that's because it's a fantastic way to get community backing and really build support for your book before it comes out. So it's actually a fantastic marketing resource as well. So don't let the cost side of things hold you back. One of my last sort of questions that I want to bring to you, or messages I want to leave you with, is finances aside, what is the cost of not writing and sharing your story? What will it cost you on a deep soul level if you get to the end of your life and you haven't brought this story out into the world? If you think about all the people that could have been helped with your story, how will it make you feel if you don't bring this story to the people who maybe need it most? As an example, just today, this morning, I got this message from someone reminding me that 3 years ago was one of the launches of my first book, and that even today, this book is one that she still reaches for more than ever. And it really made me think, like, there have been so many challenges and things that have almost prevented me from bringing my story to the world. And if I had listened to those doubts, and if I hadn't taken small, consistent steps, there would be so many more people like this person here who hadn't had the opportunity to read this book that they felt they really needed to read. Been amazing opportunities that I wouldn't have had, and amazing messages from people around the world who never would have heard these messages when they really needed to hear them. So I want to share this with you just to remind you that each of us have a story that is incredibly powerful, and a story that can really change our communities and our world. And it's really important to remember that in the hard times, if you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit. And this is one of my favorite quotes that I stand by from Banksy. So that's a little bit about what I'd like to share with you today. And before we get to questions, just want to remind you as well that I do have a resource here that you've probably seen that I am giving away to everybody who has come along to this session today. And that's my 10-step author checklist guide for becoming a published author. So if you go to this link here, jasrawlinson.com/author checklist, which I may drop in the chat in a little bit as well, you can download a free copy of that resource. But yeah, that is a little bit of what I'd like to share with you today. And thank you very much, Scotty, for inviting me along.
That's excellent. Hey, I'll open up the floor in a second for some questions, but I was going to bring it up and then you did anyway. So a little bit of a short story here is my mother-in-law passed away this year, and we've actually got my wife's got a mentally disabled sister, and there's this massive long story, and they always said they should write a book because of all the dramas and all the stuff that was happening to help all the other, mums and dads out there that have got a mentally disabled, son or child or something, or brother or sister, to help them along that journey. And also there's some fun sides to it too. Like, it was quite funny in parts, but it was also quite emotional. But the reality is she took it to her grave. And, anyway, long story short is she probably should have written the book and taken the time. But most people don't have that ability to go that next level. And it's not something I could offer her either, right? So she had to really want to do it on her own. But there was so many times they said, we should write a book about all this,
Exactly. And so many people say that, and they have this dream, but then they either don't know what the next step is, or they go, oh crap, now I actually have to do the work. Okay, I'd rather just keep dreaming about this, and that's a sad reality. I had a conversation with someone recently who was been dreaming for years of writing a book to pay honor and legacy to her mother who'd passed away. And then she was like, okay, I know I need to do this. This is what I need to do. And then at the last minute, she was like, oh, actually, this feels really scary because now and she literally said, now I have to do the work. And she was like, yeah, I'm going to have to think about it. And just went from like, yeah, I'm doing this to, oh no, I have to do the work. And that's the big difference between people who truly care. That's the difference between what makes a great author and just an everyday writer. It's not the talent, it's the person who is courageous enough to say, I know I need to do this and I'm going to do it. And even if it takes me a couple of years or whatever, I'm going to keep working towards doing this because this is important to me, versus the people that just want to dream about it because it's a nice dream to have. So,
and Carol's story would have been one of passion. That even though she may not be an author or a writer, it would have had that passion and story behind it that would have made it work. But at the same time, she's like one of millions that just, goes and it just never comes out. And that's okay too. I mean, obviously it'd be very vulnerable and very personal too. So not everyone wants to really share that when it comes down to it. So you can't make someone write a book, even though she kept on saying I should. She has to really want to do it, or else when it comes to the discipline of execution, it gets a little bit more difficult. But I thought that was excellent. We'll open up the floor in a second for some questions, but I've got one more to ask, but I'll wait and see if it comes up in all the questions first. But does anyone have anything they'd like to comment on that? I mean, that was pretty good. Yeah, go for it.
Jas, well, it was really good to listen to. Very exciting. I'm obviously going to buy your book and read it. I did write a book. I wrote a book it's probably 10 years ago now called Getting Into Trouble Standing Still. And I have a disabled brother, and he was part of the story. Anyway, Allen and Unwin was the potential publisher, and I've got a file of reject letters from all the other publishers, but Allen and Unwin said, we'd like to publish it, but it needs to go a bit darker. And they gave some suggestions on how it would go darker. So my intellectually handicapped brother's name is Raymond, and in the book, his name was Raymond as well. So the story's, like Scotty said, quite funny, but then there is some things. And they said, Raymond will need to get beaten up for being intellectually handicapped or something like that, abused in some way or whatever. And I'm like, no, I can't. Wow. I wouldn't be able to write that. And they said, we can walk you through that journey. And I just, and the manuscript's that thick, it's 60,000 words. I don't think it took a lot to be honest, wasn't quite painful to write. Sorry, I've got a tradesman here. If there's noise in the background. So Raymond is still alive. Like from a to get a ghostwriter, how do you get one, and how much does it cost, and how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are lots of ways to find ghostwriters. Some people have, and this is probably a good story for you. Someone reached out to me last year and said, Jas, I have worked with 7 ghostwriters in the last year trying to write this book. Theirs was, I think, like a how-to, more business book, but they were like, I just can't find the right person. And they had gone through, I think, Fiverr and some platforms like that to try and find someone to work with. And what I'd say is, you get what you pay for. So there are plenty of cheap ghostwriting options out there. But I think if you're going to go that path, it's important not to skimp. You also want someone who can emotionally journey with you and take on a lot of that trauma. I had a conversation with this recently. I have to do that very regularly, and I've had to learn more as well and get better at implementing my own self-care because I do take on a lot of trauma for my clients. So it's important to work with someone who understands a bit about the content that you're going to delve into, particularly if it is of that darker nature. And you're welcome to send me a message on LinkedIn if you want to have a conversation about costs, because it varies very much so depending on what you're after. So.
Okay, so you're a ghostwriter.
I do
yourself?
ghostwriting as well, so I can definitely have a conversation with you if you want to have a conversation. Via LinkedIn message about that. Yeah,
that'd be good. Thank you.
And Linda, I can also add some. I nearly paid a guy 3 years ago to help me write some books, and it was $35,000 for 7 books that I think I've got in me, and he would have helped me do that. And he wanted the money in advance. I said, well, no, I'll sort of pay $5,000 for each book as we go. Make sure he delivers the first one before we pay all of them, right? And we fell over in the negotiation process. Not on price. I was happy to pay, but when it came to terms, he wanted me to pay in advance. I said, well, no, I'm not paying in advance, and that's where it fell over. But I was prepared to get a ghostwriter to help me write some stories. So I think finding the right one is not easy, I would suggest. I didn't bother going down again. I thought, well, I just won't write a book yet. So
I might have found the right one.
Awesome. Now Rob raised his hand. Rob.
G'day, Scotty. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and g'day, Jas.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise. So my question is there a sweet spot for the length of the books? Like, is there an ideal range in words or pages, however it's measured, for it to be a success? Understand it's got a lot to do with it.
It's a really good question. I'd say success, maybe word count and page count isn't so much about the successful side of it, but if you're looking at a memoir, most first-time memoir authors will write somewhere, it's suggested between 60 to 80,000 words, and somewhere between 200 to 300 pages. Again, it depends on each person. I know some people who have written books on the longer side, more like the 300 pages, because as well as their story, they also wanted to have a quite comprehensive section at the end of actionable insights and personal development and things like that. But on the flip side, for example, my first book that I brought out was only maybe around the 20,000 words. And that was because it was a small collaboration book and it was really an experiment to see how it would go. The second book is about 40,000 words. You can see sort of how thick it is. It's 150 pages, about 45,000 words.
How was the cover?
Yeah, I love this cover. It's and I worked to find a really good cover designer for that too, because I didn't want to end up in the self-publishing DIY disaster pile. But yeah, 60 to 80,000 words, 200 to 300 pages. I would go for at least 200 pages. And also, if you just want to write a book that you're going to sell on your website, it doesn't matter so much what the page count is. But if you have a real dream of getting this book into bookstores, one thing I will say is that with my first book, because it was quite small, if it was ever placed on the shelf like this, you would never pick it out in amongst thousands of books. if it was being sold in somewhere like Happy Frog Cafe that stocks my books in coughs, you'll always see it because it's sitting like this. But that's one important thing, is you want to think about where you want to see your book released. And if it's in a bookstore, you'll want to go for obviously a cover design that stands out and a thicker book as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Anyone else?
Yeah, thank you, Jas. I was going to thank you and Scotty for the number of times, I don't know if you realize, the number of times you said it's about sharing your story, which sounds much less daunting than writing a book. And the other thing that you said, which was really helpful, is just in terms of overcoming that imposter syndrome, that whole idea that you're actually serving somebody else. The book is not just for you to become popular or famous or rich, but that you're serving somebody else. Just like if you're out on the beach and you're somebody's out there drowning and you're going out to save somebody, and you might say, well, exactly. I can't do it because I don't have a perfect swim stroke yet. I love
that visualization too. And I was actually going to say before, it is all about serving people as opposed to seeing it as writing a book, or I need to, make X amount of sales or whatever. It's, I want to write a book to serve people, and how can I best do that? So I'm really glad that resonated.
Yeah, it did. So that's really, I think that's something that holds people back a lot. Like, I mean, I do videos for YouTube, and it's the same thing with going on video. I could never do video, and I tell them, look, you realize you just said that on Zoom, like you're on video. You realize that. And so just that whole notion that it's not just serving me, because especially if you want to serve others and you feel like by writing a book, it's just giving, it's all about me. Yeah. Once you actually change that perspective, I think that really helps. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Anyone else got a question?
Not so much a question, just to thank Jas for the presentation. I got a lot out of it, Jas. And
thank you.
Tips. I look forward to following up the tips and ongoing conversation. And I've just got to reinforce what Anthony just mentioned as well. We all come into this. I think it's not just with writing books and publishing them, but that imposter syndrome. The idea of if to say, hey, I'm not big on promoting myself. I'm not big on getting the message out. But it's not about that. It's about sharing the message. It's something of value that you want to get out there. And I think that's something that probably the biggest stumbling block that we need to step aside from ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been good.
Go, Paul.
Yeah, likewise. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed I like the bit about, right, it's all about storytelling. Yeah, which, I mean, my writing's all right, but I think it is. I'm much more of I feel like I'm more of a storyteller than I'm just, right, giving leadership tips or ways to do better project management, whatever. It feels like it's more, like you say, it's more conversational, more just, hey, here's some of my experiences, and here's the good side, here's the bad side. But yeah, very much more about it being sharing that story. Yeah,
definitely. And if you look at it that way as well, I mean, it's, as I shared, you are much more likely to impart knowledge and grow your business and become, seen as an expert in your field or a thought leader, whatever you want to call it, if you are doing it through sharing stories. Taria Pitt actually does a fantastic job at that. If you ever see her social posts, most of the time you have no idea that she's about to share like a link to a course or something like that, because the story is so captivating, and then it ties in with exactly what she wants to share or promote. So people never see it as a icky thing, like, oh, she's trying to sell to me. Oh, she thinks she's like such an expert in this area. So if you are keeping it conversational and sharing stories, then that's exactly the right it's exactly the right process to take, as long as you're also tying in what it is that you want to share and your call to action and all those things.
Cool. Can I ask a question?
Well, I guess we better let you, since this is your your room.
I'm getting confused with the self-publishing. Now, I thought self-publishing meant that you self-published, but you still need a self-publisher. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you still
Yeah,
need
that's
someone to print the books. Is that what you're saying? Or you can't just find a printer somewhere to print the books? Is that
yes,
the message I'm hearing?
You can just self-publish and then find a printer to print it. What I've done is kind of a hybrid between traditional and self-publishing, and it's called assisted publishing. So I've worked with an award-winning kind of assisted publishing house. They will help with the production side of things, putting the book together. They do have marketing plans and things like that. I tend to do a lot of it myself, but they will then they'll then help me with finding a good printing option. So yeah, you still have to find someone to help you print the book, produce the book, unless you're a whiz at graphic design and all those sorts of things. But I would always recommend, if you can find a good assisted publisher, it's a good hybrid between the two, and it's more supportive than, say, some of those self-publishing houses who kind of just either give you a PDF and put it on Amazon, or they do your book up, but then it's up to you to find somewhere to print it. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. The reason why I say that is because I've actually just finished a book.
Cool.
I'm going down the self-publishing route.
Yeah.
Because it's just the kind of person I am. I've gone from paying someone to just doing it on my own. But I just finished and I've actually co-authored. So I did the same journey as you. I was talking to someone 6 months ago, and she showed me an article, and I said, this is a book. I can't remember what happened next. We decided to write a book instead, and we committed to the 1st of February to get it done, and we did. So what's finished, I don't know, but it's finished enough we can tell people. In fact, this is the first group of people I've actually told. So it was actually pretty good that you were doing this, and I'm actually ready to tell people it's downloadable as a PDF or an ebook at the moment. So I've just practiced and done that myself. We don't have a cover yet though, but it's enough now for people to go and have a look and do the editing.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but it's all about business. It's actually about getting value out of your business when it's time to sell, and how to grow your business so it's sellable. It's a business book entirely.
Yep.
So it's not a memoir, completely different market. And to be honest with you, it's really only there for the market that I know. It's not really there for me to be a best-selling author in any way, shape or form. So it does fit the same thing as memoir, but it's entirely about business. So that's why I wanted to know about the self-publishing route, because look, I have no interest in whether it's 10 books it sells or 1,000 books it sells. I have no interest in that being a best-selling author, nor does the other author. She's actually a business investor, and for her, it's actually primarily a solution for the people that she can't sell their business for, because they don't really have a sellable business. They've just got a job, and she wants to help people go on that journey so they can create a business that's sellable rather than just a job they've got. Even though they might have a good business, it's not really a sellable business. So we come from two different sides, and we were both on the same page here. It's really just going to address some of the things we want to share, and it's really not part of the story I want to share anyway. So for me, it was a win-win. The other thing with books, just to hitchhike on it, is it's also perfect time duplication. I always try to talk to people about having multiple streams of income.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've written a book, it opens up doors for other streams of income, but it's also time duplication. You've done it once, 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, and it's still there today. So if someone goes into that Cafe Happy Frog and buys one of your books tomorrow, and might sell 10 books this week, it's just another stream of income. Might not be huge, but it's still another stream of income. $1,000 a year, $10,000 a year, whatever it might be. So I'm a big believer in time duplication, and that's why I'm a big believer in books. And Anthony does it with videos, and Anthony might write a book as well. But time
it's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an area that I usually dive into, and when I run a masterclass, is about how to use the book to create those additional streams of income, and not just see the book as your main source of income, but use it for speaking, and use it for coaching, and use it for content for your opt-ins and your lead magnets and all kinds of things. So, and like you said, once you've done it, you've just saved yourself so much time, and you can slice it up like a pizza and use it in lots of different ways. So
Yeah, and it's like a singer with a song, and they might still go and perform later on and do live concerts, but the song's been done, the hard bit's been done, the recording, the thinking of it. And same as making a movie, you know, people are still watching Star Wars, and it was 40 years ago, you know, so it's the same thing, but it's a book and it's your information. And over the length of time, and as you know, life continues on, the actual story and everything else actually often becomes even more and more important. So it matures and settles into itself too over time. That's where memoirs have another benefit as opposed to business books that I'm doing for now.
Absolutely.
But we'll wrap up with that. I think that's been a good session. But any other final questions anyone would like to ask as we start to wrap up? Yeah, go for it, Linda.
First of all, Rob, did you have a question? You had your hand up for a while. Two things. It's good that self-publishing has changed and become more popular, because back in the day you needed to have a large space underneath your bed to keep all the boxes of unsold books. And bad news is I'm pissed off that I'm nowhere near the Happy Frog anymore. I used to live in Valor Beach, and I could have driven up there today and got your book. I live in Tasmania now, so it's a little bit more difficult.
That's okay. I'll send you the link on LinkedIn after this to my books. And if anybody wants to grab a copy, you can get them from jasrawlinson.com. I know Happy Frog was stocking my first book a while ago, but I'm not sure if they have sold out now. But yeah, you can always get it from jasrawlinson.com. And if anybody wants to book a call with me as well, just to talk more about the plans for your book, if you're ready to kind of make that move and move forward with making this the year that you write and publish your book, then you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via my site as well. So.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I think that's been a really good session. Like I said, I truly believe everyone has a story anyway. In fact, you shared the stats to say that. And but only a few people ever get to it, which is probably fair enough, because especially if it's a memoir, it's quite an emotional story, and you've really got to lay it on the line.
You've got to be really ready to delve into all of the good memories and also the painful ones as well. So,
and the reality is, Linda, I think a lot of people relate more to the negative things they do, the positive things. That's just the way it is. In fact, when I get up and speak, everyone wants to know about how I handled the downtimes and how I handled the problems in my life. Not all the things when I won trophies, they go, I don't want to hear about that stuff. They want to know, what did you do when things weren't going right?
Yeah.
So I get why publishers would want that part of the story, because it's probably the main part of the story people want to know. How did you overcome adversity, whatever it was? And I think that's where the emotional side is. So there's some truth to that. So that's why I think actually doing that next phase is a really difficult thing for people to do when it comes to writing a memoir. But I think you've inspired a few people, and a lot of people are going to watch this session and get inspired to do it, which is going to be awesome, because I think everyone's got a story that needs to be told. So on that note, thanks everyone for coming. And Jas, thank you very much for your content today. That was exceptional. And in the show notes, we'll obviously have the links to your checklist. We'll put the links to who you are and how people can find out more. But that was certainly a very, very good session.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Scotty, and thanks everyone.
All right. See you, everyone.
See everyone.
See ya.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.